Welcome to your first APSIM training module. I'm Keith Pembleton. I work at the University of Southern Queensland, and I'm also a member of the APSIM reference panel. And I'm going to be taking you through your very first steps of using APSIM to get you familiar with the interface and the mechanics of how the model actually works. So when you launch APSIM for the very first time, you'll have a pretty boring blank white screen here that is the APSIM user interface. And this is where we're going to populate and build our models. We've got a toolbar up the top with some various options like start new simulation, open a save simulation, run a simulation as well, an options menu. And now down the bottom we've also got a toolbox. We've got a toolbar here with toolboxes, and these toolboxes contain the components where we'll build our APSIM simulations from. For our first exercise, we're going to do a fallow water balance simulation. So a pretty simple simulation. It doesn't contain any crops or crop management, so it's a really good one to begin to learn with. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start a new simulation. So if you click on the new button, and it opens up what appears to be an open simulation interface. And this is because it's easier to build an APSIM simulation from an existing simulation rather than starting from scratch. So in the menu here, scroll down till we get to a simulation called continuous wheat. Select that and open it. Now the first thing we always do when we start a new simulation is we want to save it with something new. So if you click Save As, and then navigate to a place where you'll want to create a new folder. So I'm in my Documents folder. In my case, create a new folder and call this one APSIM Training. And then save this simulation with the name Module 1. It's a good idea if you are sending your simulation to somebody else to help troubleshoot or bug check for you. It's a good idea to include your name in the save simulation. That way that your colleague can keep track of whose simulation they're looking at. So just click on Save. Now, we're going to be adding a toolbox, an additional toolbox down to the bottom of our toolbar here. So to do that, click on the Options menu up the top and then go Add Toolbox. And then we want to navigate to where APSIM was installed on your computer. So in my case, it's on the C drive in the Programs File folder. You can see there I've got APSIM 710 with the build number after it. Open up that folder, navigate to the user interface, and then there's a subfolder there called Toolboxes. Open that up and then select the Training Toolbox and open it. Then go OK. And now we've added a training toolbox down the very bottom of our simulation of our APSIM interface. So next thing to do is just to make sure that we're using the right weather file. So if you click on the meteorological node in what's called the simulation tree, you'll see here we've got a meteorological record here for Gundawindi from 1940 to 1989. And scroll through it, there's a daily record for every single one of the years there, right down through. So fair bit of information there and very difficult to comprehend just by looking at the raw numbers. So we've got some useful graphics options here for interrogating this data. So we've got a rainfall chart which shows our daily rainfall for each year, and we can scroll through years. We can also increase the number of years displayed as well on our figure. So we can look at this from a monthly rainfall pattern, and this is very handy to look at to make sure that we're looking at to work out whether you're in a winter dominant rainfall environment or a summer dominant rainfall environment. So a good quick check to make sure your weather file is correct. We can also investigate the temperatures, and so this graph gives us daily average temperature, daily maximum and minimum temperature for each year, and we can change the years that are displayed there and the number of years, and we can also look at radiation, solar radiation as well, and we've also got daily rainfall plotted on that solar radiation chart. So just if we go back to our raw data, make sure you've got the Gundawindi meteorological file there. For loading in new meteorological files, you use the browse button. It opens up an open file interface, and you can browse to whatever meteorological file you would like to use. Now, first thing we want to do is set the start and end dates for our simulation. So if you click on the clock node, this is where we can we tell APSIM what day or what date we want to start our simulation on and what date we want to finish our simulation on. So for this exercise, we want to start the simulation on the 1st of the 1st, 1989, and we want to finish it on the 31st of the 12th, 1989. So we're going to run a full 12 months. Now, APSIM can be very picky about the date format that you enter in here. So make sure you enter it in a date format of day, month, and then year. For our Northern Hemisphere colleagues or our North American colleagues, entering in by month, day, and then year will result in errors. So now we've got our date set. Now we're going to change the soil that's in our simulation. So if you go to your training toolbox and click on it, it brings up a series of folders, and if you open up the soils folder by clicking on the cross in the square that's right next to it, we've got two soils there. We've got a sand and a heavy clay. Click on the heavy clay while holding your mouse button down, drag it up and place it into the paddock. And then we can close off our toolbox. So now we've got two soils in our paddock. We don't want the original soil, we want the heavy clay soil. So just right click on soil, on the first original soil, and then select delete, and that removes it from our simulation tree. If you expand out our soil node, so click on the box with the cross, that's right next to the heavy clay, there's a number of soil components. So there's a water component. If you click on that, that gives us our description of our soil lower limits, our drain upper limits, our saturated soil content, and what the water content is when the soil is air dried. And this is also specified for a number of crops. If you look at the soil water node, here's our drainage characteristics. The soil organic matter node describes our organic matter, soil organic carbon, and pools in the soil, or the soil carbon pools. Our analysis node contains additional information about soil analysis, so pH, chloride. You can enter in here a number of different variables in terms of soil mineral contents. Depending on what you're doing in APSIM, you may or may not need them. There's an initial water node, and note here that our currently we've got the initial water set to completely full. We want to change that down to 10%. So use the scrollers or enter in 10% into our into here, and we essentially drying the soil out. Now, because we're running a fallow simulation, we're assuming that this has started after a crop has come out of the field, and so we can assume that the soil is pretty well dried. In this case, we can change the distribution of water in the soil profile as well, so we can have a field from the top, which what we currently have got, and you can see here in the graphics interface, that's where the water is. If we change to evenly distributed, it distributes what water is in the soil profile evenly down the profile. Now, for this simulation, we want it filled from top, so make sure that is checked. The other thing we need to do is specify our initial nitrogen content, or our soil initial nitrogen status. So click on the initial nitrogen node, and then here we've got our essentially a data table we can enter in our numbers here. The NO3 and NH4 headers are highlighted in red. That means that we can change them. So if you right click on them with your mouse, you can either change it from parts per million or to kilograms per hectare. In this case, we want to select the kilograms per hectare for both the NO3 and NH4. Okay, and then we want to specify that we've got 50 kilograms of nitrate in the soil per hectare and 3 kilograms of ammonium in the soil per hectare. Okay, Now currently we're only specifying this for the top 10 centimeters of the soil. We want to distribute that evenly across the entire soil profile. So if you click back on the water node, you'll notice here that our lowest soil layer here is, its lowest depth is 180 centimeters. So go back to the initial nitrogen node and change this from 10 centimeters to 180 centimeters. So this will distribute that nitrogen evenly across the entire soil profile. Now we want to specify what outputs we'd like our simulation to give us. Essentially what data we want to collect from our simulation. So we've got an output node in our simulation tree here. If you expand it out, there's two nodes below it called variables and reporting frequency. So click on the variables node, and then we want to delete biomass, yield, grain protein, grain size, and ESW from our outputs. So just select them and then hit delete on your keyboard to remove them as outputs. Leave date because we want that as an output. And then we're going to specify some new outputs, and we're going to find them through this very handy interface on the right hand side here. This is our output filters, because there's a lot of outputs that we can ask APSIM for, and the filter is a very quick way of getting to what we want. So for our outputs, first of all, select the clock node, and we'd like to specify we'd like an output of day, so that'll give us the day of the year, and we would also like the year as an output, so double click on year, and you notice each time you double click on them, it adds them to our output list. Okay, under the meteorological node, so this is the MET node or MET component, then select rain from the list. So we'll get rainfall as an output. And then under our soil node, so our heavy clay component, we want to specify a number of outputs, and we're going to use the search function here because, as you can see, there is lots of outputs available from the soil. So you use the search function to help narrow it down. So first one we want is one called ESW, which is the extractable soil water relative to the lower limit 15. So double click on it. We also want one called ES. So we just want ES in our search bar, and that's our soil evaporation. So double click on that and add that to our list. We also want one called runoff. So type in run into the search bar, and we get runoff, so double click on runoff. We also would like drainage, so if you type drain, we'll get drainage, so that's our drainage from the bottom of the soil. And then we'd like our soil nitrate. Now, so if you type in NO3, we can find it there as NO3. So double click on it to add it to our output list. However, notice that this one here also has yes under array, and that means that it will provide for us a soil nitrate value for every soil layer in the soil. Now, for this particular simulation, we don't want that. We want that summed over the entire soil profile. So in our outputs list, just click in and then add open parentheses and close parentheses behind NO3. And that tells APSIM that we want that summed across every soil layer. We also would like our soil mineralization. So if you type into the search bar mineralized, you will find a value, a parameter called DLTN-min. So double click on that one. And again, notice it's an array. We want the total for our entire soil, so we're going to put an open parentheses and close parentheses behind it. Finally, we want some outputs from our soil organic matter component. So select it from the component filter, and from there we would like our surface organic matter weight. So that tells us how much the biomass or the weight of the surface organic matter on the soil surface. And then we also would like the surface organic matter cover. So this tells us how much area is covered by that surface organic matter. Okay, so now we've got our output specified, but we also need to tell APSIM how frequently we would like those outputs reported to us. So if you click on the reporting frequency node, and you notice here it's got harvesting as the reporting frequency. Now, because we don't have a crop in this simulation, we don't want to report when harvesting because we'll never get an output in this case. So select it and delete it. And just like for the outputs, we've got a frequency filter here. So if you go to the clock, and then we can select end of day under the clock, and that will give us an output every single day that the simulation runs over. Now, before we run the simulation, we've got a number of other things we need to do. We need to rename our simulation from continuous wheat because we're not running a wheat simulation in this case. We are running a heavy clay fallow simulation, so rename it to heavy clay. And APSIM does this annoying thing when you change the name of your simulation, it collapses down the simulation tree, so just expand it back out. And then we also want to remove some components. We don't need the fertilizer component for this simulation, so just right click on it and select delete, right click on wheat and select delete as well, because we don't need the wheat component because we're not growing a crop. And we also don't need the manager folder, so right click on it and delete it as well. We don't need the manager folder because we don't have any crop management to specify. So now we've got our simulation ready to run. So hit save to save our simulation and then press run. And hopefully your simulation will run clean with no errors. If you get a red cross up in this section here of the interface right next to the run bar, that means you've got an error in your simulation. But in our case here, it's run perfectly fine. It's run successfully. So if we now click on the output file node, you'll see here we've got a daily output for the year 1989 of all the outputs we've specified. So here's our extractable soil water, our runoff, our drainage, our soil nitrate, our mineralization, and our surface organic matter weights. Now this there's a lot of data there to interpret, and it's difficult to interpret the raw numbers, so we're going to create some graphs. To do that, click on the graphs toolbox down the bottom here, expand out the graphs folder, click on XY and drag it up and place it into the simulations folder at the very top of the simulations tree. And expand out that XY graphs element till you get to the what's called the APSIM file reader. Click on that node and then click on browse, and then navigate back to where we saved our simulation. So I saved my simulation in my documents folder in a folder called APSIM training, and once you navigate to that, you'll have a heavyclay.out file. Select it and open it. Then click on the plot node just above the APSIM file reader, and we want to specify what our X variables are. So to do that, click on the box underneath X variables, make sure it's highlighted pink, and then click on date. So that will plot date on our X-axis for our graph. Then we want to specify our what variables we're going to plot on the Y-axis. So select the Y variables box, make sure it's highlighted pink, and there's two variables that we'd like to plot. One is called ESW and the other one is rain. Now change the point type from circle to none, and then to see that graph, click on XY, and you should see a graph that looks like this. Okay, but this has got it both ESW and rainfall plotted on the same axis. We might want to change the axis that we plot one of these variables on because we're plotting two variables on the same figure. So go back to the plot node, and then to change the variables that we're plotting, say rainfall on, select rainfall, right click on it, and then select right hand axis. And now if we click back on the XY graphs node, we've now got rainfall plotted on our right hand axis and extractable soil water plotted on our left hand axis. Okay, we're going to create another graph. So to very simply do that, just click on the XY graph and then drag it back up into the simulations folder, and that creates a duplicate. Okay, we'll name our original XY graph, we'll rename it. So right click on it and select rename, and we want to change that one to name it to ESW for extractable soil water. For our second graph, we're going to call this one runoff, and we're going to plot runoff. So right click on it, select rename, and type runoff. Now to expand out all the nodes underneath the runoff graph, select the plot node, and we want to change from ESW. So select ESW under the Y variables and delete it, and then select runoff from our data table down the bottom here. And then if we click back on our graph here, you'll see here we've got rainfall plotted. To turn on plotting runoff, just click on the little checkbox there, and now we can see runoff has been plotted along with rainfall, and you see little peaks in runoff associated with some rainfall events. Now that's all well and good, and congratulations on running your very first APSIM simulation and creating some graphs from it. But often when we're running APSIM simulations, we want to compare between two different treatments. And so in this case, we're going to create a second treatment. We're going to create a different soil to run our fallow across. So we're going to create a whole nother simulation. And a very quick way of doing that is to select the heavy clay simulation, click on it, and drag it and place it back up into the simulations folder. So now we've got two simulations. We've got a heavy clay and heavy clay 1. We want to rename our heavy clay 1 simulation, so right click on it and select rename, and rename it to sand. Okay. Expand out that simulation, the sand simulation tree, till we get to the paddock, and you see here we want to remove our heavy clay soil, so right click on it and select delete, and then go back into the training toolbox. Under the soils there's a sand soil, click on it, drag it and place it into this paddock in the sand simulation. Okay, because we've brought in a new soil, we now need to specify the initial water, initial nitrogen conditions. So select initial water and change our amount of initial water to 10% and leave it filled evenly from the top. And for initial nitrogen, we want to change the depth that's distributed over to 180 centimeters, just like for our heavy clay. Make sure you change the units that both nitrate and ammonia are represented in, so change them to kilograms per hectare, and specify 50 kilos a hectare of nitrate and 3 kilograms of nitrate of soil ammonia for the soil. Once you've done that, hit save, select the simulations folder and select run. Okay, and hopefully again both simulations are run clean. Now to compare, we're going to create a graph now to compare across both our simulations. So select the graphs node and select in the graphs toolbox, sorry. Under the graphs folder there, select the XY node and click and drag it back up into the simulations folder for our simulations. And rename this one to rename it to runoff comparison. And expand out right to the APSIM file reader, and then select browse. Okay, and you should in In the menu that opens up there should be two output files. There should be a heavy clay and a sand output file. Now we want to select both. So the way that we do that is hold down the control button or the control key on your keyboard and then click on heavy clay and click on sand, and we'll have both files selected, and then click open. Go back to our plot node then, and we want, as an X variable, we would like date, and for Y variables we would like runoff and rainfall. But we just don't want to plot runoff, we want to plot a cumulative runoff for the fallow. So right click on it and then select cumulative from the drop down menu that appears there. And then also we'd like to plot rainfall on the right hand axis. So right click on it and select right hand axis. Now click back on our runoff comparison graph there, and you see here we've got rainfall plotted for both our simulations, but now we've got also a cumulative runoff for sand and a cumulative runoff for the heavy clay. So once we've done that, now we can compare between the runoff that occurs from a sand soil during fallow compared to a heavy clay during a fallow. So congratulations on completing the very first module of the APSIM training. We'll see you soon for module 2.